Hello. This video is called Upgraded by God because I believe that we are all being upgraded. We always have been, but right now it's a really big deal. So many of you have been asking about my playlist on Kundalini and evolution. And I just want to start out by saying that I don't pretend to know anything, because I had absolutely no religious training except to grow up in a Baptist Christian church. And so I learned no dogma about how Kundalini should happen, no guidance at all. My experience and everything that I'm going to share with you is based solely on extreme ability to love. And I was born with that. So, I told you in an earlier video that I had never heard of Kundalini, and then all of a sudden it just happened. And the funny version of that story is that I went into a restaurant to eat my first Indian food ever. And it felt like home. It felt so good. And I knew that it was the right food for me. And so we left and we came back, and I was climbing up into the seat of my VW van. And when my butt hit the seat, this warm liquid light just came flowing up my spine. And all of a sudden I knew the answer to everything. In fact, it would be better to say that there were no longer any questions. And I lived that way for several months. And I still live that way, but I'm more grounded with it now. So I'm not trying to help you think that I know the answers to how to understand Kundalini, because it's not the only way to be upgraded by God. But for some reason, that's the form it took in me. And we can surmise that maybe I had lifetimes, who knows? But I want to tell you what I know about Kundalini. So I do know that most religions understand that we humans are evolving, becoming an expression of the power of love, the power of peace, bliss, wisdom. And supposedly this is where humanity is headed. And every religion has its own version of being upgraded to another dimension. And it's always huge, magnificent energy. And in each religion there's a different expression, but you get similar results. So always you get a new level of consciousness. You can almost always use this energy for healing yourself or others. It's always about praise. It's always about being in love with the divine. And it always gives you wisdom that people would say that it's more godlike. So for example, in Africa, they have what's called the Noom. And the Noom is a tribal dance. And they dance, the entire tribe dances until they drop. They dance and dance and dance until they build energy to a level of intensity that healing occurs. And usually there's a person in the center of the circle for whoever they're dancing for 1 or 2 or even 3 days they talk about. And eventually, so much energy is gathered. There's such focused power. And they literally, the people in the circle literally throw it at the person in the center who is in need. And then the tribe members go to sleep. They're really tired. And while they sleep, the energy inside them drains back down to normal, because They understand that this is not something that most people can hold. And then there's the Native American tradition, and you know that one. There's chanting, and there's dancing, and there's enduring pain. And that leads to visions and healing, and very often safety from danger. They can tell when the enemy is coming or where they need to hide. But they don't try to hold it either. They allow the shaman to hold the information that they've gathered and to hold the energy afterwards. And the rest of the tribe goes back to being able to function. And then the Shekinah is the Jewish version, which reveals a full measure of divinity, ecstasy, wisdom, bliss, and love are all used as a reference point for divine power. But again, they don't assume that most people can withstand this. And so only certain wise ones are allowed to hold this energy. And then Christians attribute this to what they call the Holy Spirit. And sometimes they're speaking in tongues, they're dancing, they're being possessed, they're being taken over by Jesus. And that teaches them who God is. But again, it's only temporary. They're not expected to be able to hold this in their daily life because they wouldn't be able to function. And with Kundalini, the idea in many different cultures is that the energy is stored at the base of the spine until divinity decides that the person is ready to handle that much sacred power. And when the time is right, warm liquid bliss, usually, sometimes it's not so blissful, but warm liquid bliss usually rises up the spine, often and hopefully a little bit at a time, so that massive electricity, which is this form of love, can be integrated without damaging the nervous system. Most people can't hold too much of this electricity and still have a functional life. But they have experienced enough to use it as proof of peace, proof of love, so that they can return to that when they need to. Only a few people can hold a full rising, and suddenly they are filled to overflowing with information and energy that might take a lifetime or even more to merge the human mind and the human body. Those who can integrate often experience what they call siddhis, special powers. Others who cannot sometimes experience pain or a mental breakdown, but most people are in between. After the initial experience of awe and bliss and no mind, which takes place sometimes for weeks or months, their view of what is possible has changed. But ongoing energy this intense burns like electricity, sometimes even electrocutes. So most people return to a normal life, but with the big picture. They've seen what's possible. But then there are some people, hopefully, who have a sturdy nervous system. And they are so willing to devote their life to learning to hold this much God. And these people usually go through those powers also. And they begin with less intense, less invasive attributes, such as maybe being very psychic, or they have precognition, or they have super hearing, or they can predict the future, or they can know what others are thinking. And these people are considered to be extremely sensitive, and I bet that many of you were told when you were little that you were too sensitive, because you were born with this precursor that was just waiting to let the Kundalini rise. But with a deep spiritual yes, your spirit may decide that this is your lifetime to evolve. And so you don't let the energy fall back down. Suddenly you're operating with a new, improved brain, which seems to be changing systems constantly. For example, I told you in my first video that my brain switched from doing math by numbers and switched over to doing math by colors. I knew how to divide something by the shade of green. And I knew when the answer was right by the shade of blue. And sometimes as the gifts become more intense, like for me example, people's burns just disappeared. Like I remember a man coming to see me and he said, I just fell asleep under the heat lamp and I have blisters all over my back. And I said, well, you know, I'm really new at this. I don't know what I'm doing, but please come in and I'll just love you. That's all I know how to do. So he came and he laid down on my massage table and I put my hands not on his body, of course, but near it because he had blisters. And I felt so much sweetness, so much love for him, such tenderness. But at a certain point, I just felt done. And he still had the blisters, and I didn't know what to do about that. And so finally, I just said to him, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I don't know anything else to do, but I'll send you love. And so he left, thanking me. And I felt so tired, so sleepy. And so I just went to bed, and a few hours later, I heard a banging on the door, and I was groggy, but I got up. And I went to the door, and he came flying in the door, hugging me, saying, look, my burns are gone. And they were, but they were on my back. And so there's a learning process here to give our entire self all the love that can flow through us to that person, but not to need to take in their pain. And I'll talk a lot about that other times. But what I know is that in times of stress, when people are near me, they often just come to peace. It's almost like they just tune to my peace. And the examples are endless as we each learn to be used by love. And that's my favorite thing in the world, to be used by love. Some people bilocate, they levitate, they disappear. But the very coolest part is that once they learn to integrate their divinity with their humanity, it's no longer a big deal at all. And very quickly, those special gifts just disappear. They don't need to do it anymore. All they needed was for God to get their attention, that love makes a difference. So obviously people going through these forms of upgrade need to take very conscious care of themselves. And very soon I will be giving you some helpful tips. But until then, have fun realizing that you too are unlimited. And just rest in yourself. Namaste.